Yusuf, what are we doing today? What? And what's the I can statement, Sarah? What is greatest common factor? What is, you gotta say it loud. Antoine, what is greatest common factor? The greatest number that goes into 2 or more numbers. So the greatest factor that goes into 2 or more numbers, right? It has to be in common. When you find GCF, what are we using to find the GCF? Like, what's our first step, or what are the pairs we're using? Kennedy? We're using factor pairs. We're using factor pairs. So if you look at 9 and 12, I found the factor pairs for 9 and I found the factor pairs for 12. If we slide down to 72 and 144, which is what I really want to show you, our extra credit problem, okay, we're using the factor pairs for 72 and 144, and we split it up into like a little T-chart like Mrs. Euglin wanted us to do and told us to do, right? A little bit easier to look at. Okay? And then what we did after we decided we're going to use factor pairs, where do you always start when creating factor pairs? Where do you always start when creating factor pairs? Jonathan? 1 times whatever the number is, right? Then you just keep on working from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 until you like match your numbers up on both sides of the factor pair, and you're done. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay? After you have established all your factor pairs, what's next? I see one hand. That's not good. After you have all of your factor pairs done, so I have all my factor pairs for 72, I have all my factor pairs for 144. What would you do then next, Cyrus? Well, I'll find all the common factors, and then eventually after you find all the common ones, you take the biggest one, and that's your greatest common factor, right? Yes or no?
Yes.
So there's some steps involved here. Start with 1, find all the factors, figure out what your biggest one is. Good to go, yes or no?
Yes.
When would you ever do this in life? When would you ever do this in life? When would you ever do this in life? Tanya?
Splitting into large groups.
Splitting into large, so if you have 2 different sets of people or 2 different sets of things and you want to find what they have in common or how to split the groups so that they're equal, that would be one way of doing it. And I know that we just did this right now, but for the video, the team example is the best idea. So when you're watching this now, tomorrow, and a week from now, remember we split into the same amount of teams when we were in different groups. Yes, no? Can you guys remember that?
Yes.
Any questions before I stop the video? Yes, Samira? We figure out how many even amount of groups we can make. How many groups can we make so that we have an even amount of teams for every group? So really, you find the greatest common factor. You find the greatest common factor. I didn't really see anybody doing this, but when we were splitting into groups, even amount of groups, did anybody like take a piece of paper out and pencil and find the greatest common factor between the 12 in the back, the 4 on the side of the room, and the 6 in the front? I didn't see anybody doing that, but really you could have done that, right?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
You could say, all right, hey, we need 2 teams. All 3 groups need 2 teams for that particular example. GCF.